There's a dark room that all of us have to enter into called the room of faith. And you can't avoid it. You've got to enter it. It's part of your growth. And it's part of what we began by saying is our spiritual pregnancy. And I wish someone would have told me that I had to enter into that room. But in that room is where our faith is built. And I like this passage out of Isaiah 50, verse 10 and 11. He says, "Who among you fears the Lord and obeys the word of his servant? Let him who walks in the dark, who has no light, trust in the name of the Lord and rely on his God. But now all of you who light fires and provide yourselves with a flaming torch, go and walk in the light of your fire and of your torches that you've set ablaze. This is what you shall receive from my hand. You will lie down in torment." See, we don't like going into a dark room, but we have to go into a dark room. That's the place where faith is built. You know, I like to say this to people, that when you know the perfect will of God, congratulations, you're an unbeliever. Because faith is not knowing what's going to happen next. That's what faith is. It's the very nature of faith, is trusting in him in the darkness. And in the darkness is where it's built, not in the light. But we don't like to walk in the darkness, so we make our own light. And so I like to tell the story of meeting Betty. And I didn't date Betty very long. And I don't know, maybe a couple of months. She said I didn't ask her to marry me. I told her that we were getting married. Well, I can't remember. But I know I wasn't going to let her get away. And one of my friends took all the photographs. He was a Swedish fella, of the wedding. I didn't know anything about that. It was a big celebration. It was a great day and a lot of fun. And so when we got back from our honeymoon, I went racing over to his house and said, "Can I have the photos of Betty and I from the wedding? I remember how beautiful she looked. I remember how I looked. All of our friends were there. I'd like to have those photos." And he gave me a yellow envelope. And this is actually what I pulled out of the envelope. And I said, "What is that?" "That's not Betty. I would never marry anyone that looked like that. I know me. She's black where she ought to be white. She's white where she ought to be black. And to be perfectly honest, the woman is just flat out scary. I wouldn't want anything to do with her. I don't recognize her." And I pulled out another one that was of me, and I said, "I don't recognize me. What is this?" And he said, "Well, brother, that's a negative." I said, "Well, I don't want the negative." And I gave it to him and said, "Throw the things away." And he said, No, you can't throw away the negative, because hidden in the negative is the positive that you long for." "Well, how do I get it?" "Well, the only way you're going to get it is you've got to come into the dark room." "But I don't like dark rooms." "But if you don't come into the dark room, you'll never find what's hidden in that." That's what Isaiah tells us. And so the question today is, how many negatives are there in your life? And what did you think the Christian life would be like? And what did you think it would be like to be a parent? And what did you think it would be like to be married? And where did you think that you would be at this point in your life? And today we hold the negatives and we want to throw them away, when God wants us to come into the dark room with him. And in that place to build faith. And so I went into the dark room with him, and he put it in the fluid, and all of a sudden an image began to appear. And I looked down in that fluid, and I could see the girl that I married. And I started to grab the thing and run out of there with it, and he said, "You can't take it with you because it'll fade now. You've got to put it in a vat of acid." Well, don't worry, somebody will provide the acid for you. It's always there. And the acid will kill that self-centeredness in you and that self-life. But hidden in the negatives are the positives that I long for, and we don't throw it away. I remember when I entered that dark room and God closed the door, all awareness of his presence was gone. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't see anything. And I walked in darkness. And for me, that was about a 10-year experience. And I can remember being frustrated as I was doing discipleship and ministry. God would give me things for others, but he'd never give me anything. I just stayed in darkness. And I'd finally come to the place where I could say this: even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because you're with me. I don't feel that you're with me. I'm tired of trying to light my own light. I can't see that you're with me. I'm not lighting my own light. Father, I'm at a place now that I just believe you're with me because I have no other option. And then the enemy was allowed to harass me and whisper, if only you'd done this and if only you'd done that, God would be near to you right now. And finally, when I came to that place and I said, no, you're here with me because you say that you're with me, the light came on and I found out that I was walking with him the whole time. It's all part of my spiritual pregnancy as I begin to see the positives in the negatives. See, this world is not out of control. It's not God fighting Satan and we're waiting to see who wins. If God is for me, then who is against me? All things work for me. I liked it in Colorado. I was driving onto the Indian reservation. And of course, that's just a whole study of victimization when you get there. And some farmer that owns the land just before you get onto the reservation put a sign up twice the size of this room that says, well, if God's for you, who could be against you? And I thought that was a great sign to have there. Everything works for me. There is nothing that works against me. All things work for me. The whole world. I learned that when I was in this coffee house ministry, that even the Jehovah's Witnesses worked for me. And a fellow would come, and that's where I sent all the psychotic people, to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember a guy coming there, and he interrupted the Bible study I was having, and he was wearing a pair of boxer shorts, that's all he had, and a broom. Now you can imagine how cogent this fellow was. And he keeps interrupting the study, and I'm trying to get him to sit down in his boxer shorts with his broom while I'm leading the Bible study. Finally, I got up from the Bible study, and I took him outside, and I put my arm around him, and I said, there's a group that really needs your wisdom. I said, it's the Jehovah's Witnesses. They could really use a guy like you. He said, really? I said, oh yeah, your leadership potential. He said, well, where are they? And I had their address, knew right where they were at. Drew him a little map, sent him down to Jehovah's Witnesses. Why should I have all the nuts? Send them off to those people. Let them handle them. Nothing works against me. How many of us have actually dug into our Bibles because we were questioned? Because somebody disagreed with us? We've had to refine our thinking because we had a confrontation with the Mormons. There isn't anything that works against me. And even coming to a place of grace and understanding grace and loving grace and His life working in you, the only way you came through that was through legalism, through trying it on your own. It all works for us. I'm not against it. I was in New Zealand and a couple of legalists confronted me. They didn't like what I was teaching. I couldn't even get a word in because they were so offended over the whole thing. And they got all done, and finally the thing calmed down. And I said, listen, are you guys in a ministry? And they told me the ministry. I said, are you on support? And they said, yes. And I said, do you have any support cards? And they said, well, we could get some. And I said, well, I'd like to support both of you about $25 a month. That's all I could do, but I'd like to support you. And they looked at me and said, why would you support us? We don't even agree with you. Why would you support us? And I said, because you work for me, and a workman's worthy of his hire. And they said, we don't work for you. I said, you do. Because people have to listen to your dribble before they're going to listen to me. So I want to support you in that. Well, they turned around and went off angry. Do you see that everybody works for us? I'm not upset over any of that. If you listen to this legalism and what you have to do and you cast Christ aside and you're going to do it all on your own, that's going to work for us in the end. So there isn't anything that's against me. God permits what He could prevent. Do you agree with that? That He permits what He could prevent? He permits failure for His glory, and situations come and they're not to frustrate me. They're there to make me turn to Him so I can see what He can do in the situation. And so a situation comes like a hammer and it begins to break me and I wonder what's happening. But as it breaks me, it gets me out of the way where Christ is released and He's already more than a conqueror and He'll overcome the problem for me right away. The whole idea is for me to come to the place where I can say what I can't do. I have a little prayer that I pray every day, which is I get up and I say, Lord, sometime today I'll need 10 seconds before I do something stupid. Just 10 seconds. And I was up at our cabin, this was a few years ago, and Noah came up to me and he said, do you know the guy that lives at the bottom of the hill? I said, yeah, I know him. He said, well, I was throwing rocks in that pool down there and he came out with his gun and pointed it at me and told me to get away. I said, he what? He said, he pointed a gun at me. I said, get in the truck. And he got in the truck and he said, what are we doing? And I said, I'm going to show you how to pistol whip somebody. So we'll go down there and take care of this. Nobody's pointing a gun at you. He'll wish he'd never pulled that thing out. And I parked at the bottom of his driveway, and the guy comes out on the porch, and I couldn't believe the guy's got his hand on his gun. And I thought, well, you just have your hand on your gun because you won't much longer. And I turned around to Noah and I said, you watch this. I mean, Grandpa said never get out something you're going to work somebody over if they can take it away from you. I'll take it away from him and beat him with it. I said, come on, you'll learn. And I stomped down the driveway and the guy's stomping toward me. And then God gives me that precious 10 seconds. And it was a strange feeling because I felt like I was floating. And all these things were going through my mind that after I have this confrontation with him, I'm going to become that man's slave. Because when I go to the grocery store, if he's in the aisle, I got to go to a different aisle. If he's getting gas, I can't stop and get my gas. If he's in the post office, I can't go in the post office. When I drive by his house, I'm not going to be able to look up at his house. He's going to live rent-free in my brain from this day forward, and he'll rule over me. And all of that was going through my head as I went walking up to the man. And so I got right up to him, and he goes, what do you want? I want to give you the keys to my house. And I reached in and I got the keys. I said, I notice you're building a fence here, and it's a long way to town, and I got tools up there, and you can use my tools. So here's the keys to my house and to use my tools so you don't have to go. And the fella just stood there. And he said, you know, I've always wanted a neighbor like you. He said, let me show you where I hang my tools. So we went over and we looked at the tools, and we talked about what tools we had and what we could share and all this. And I turned around and looked at Noah, and he's standing there going, I mean, I was the best two dads that he could have. He just didn't know which one he had. And when we walked away, I said, listen, mate, there's a way and a not the way. That's not the way. And I said, as I stood there looking at him, I just said, I can't love a guy that points a gun at my son. And God whispered to me and said, I can. Make the step. And I made the step, and I was able to love the guy, but it wasn't me doing it. It was Christ doing it through me as though it's me. It looked like me, but it wasn't. And I was really proud of Noah because a few years later, there was a bully at the school. And this guy's really rough. And he walks down the hall and everybody just moves. And Noah's in the special ed classes. And so he's kind of bumbling along and he's walking down the hall and he sees the kid and he doesn't move. And the kid stops him and says, get out of the way. Why didn't you get out of the way? He said, well, I was just going to class. I didn't know I had to get out of the way. I was just walking here in the hall. And the guy just backed off and hit him. And Noah got up and put his arm around him and just put his hand on his shoulder and said, now this doesn't change our friendship. And he went on. Do you know the next 2 years that Noah was at school there, the kid was afraid of him? When they were coming down the street, the kid had actually crossed the street. Isn't that amazing? Well, God is always putting me in places where I find out what I can't do, and I do something supernatural because it's Him doing it. And that was His experience. You can explain it this way. God's name is I am, and I have a name. I am not. And God is to me everything I am not, but He won't be to me what I'm not until I admit what I'm not. God's the great I am, and I am not, and He is everything to me I am not, but He won't be to me what I'm not until I admit what I'm not. And He's putting me in situations not to find out what I am, but what I'm not. And I like that about Moses because he was trained to be God for 40 years. And he thought that he would deliver the people in his own strength. But then 40 years in the wilderness of finding out what he was not prepared him for God to deliver the people through him. And when he came out of the wilderness a not, and God said, I'm calling you. And he says, why would you call me? And God says, why are you even asking that question? I am. But I don't have any wisdom. Well, why are you even saying that? I am your wisdom. But I don't have any strength. Well, why are you even telling me about that? Because I am. Don't lay in bed at night and recite to yourself all of your weaknesses and everything you're not, and then go down into despair because everything you're not, He can be to you. And all you're doing is reciting your qualifications for productivity in the Christian life. If I can't love, I plug into His love. If I don't have boldness, I plug into His boldness. If I can't love my wife, I plug into His love. It's everything I can't do that He's going to do for me. God's the creator, and He wants to create something in me. He's still into creating, into doing something that I cannot do. I like to look at it like this. Here's a car. And these cars have gauges. And you know they all have a speedometer that tells you how fast the car is going, and a tachometer that tells you the engine speed. So these two cars are racing. They're identical in every way. And this car is losing the race. It's only going about 25 miles an hour, but the engine speed is 6,500. It's not supposed to go over 5,000. It's ready to blow. So it's working very, very hard. This car is winning and going 110, but the engine speed is 1/3 of the other one. What's the difference? Yeah, what gear are you in? This fellow's trying to race in first gear, and this fellow's gone all the way into overdrive. So he can actually be calm, the engine's calm, and yet going 5 times faster. You don't rule your believing rules over you. And what happens is we never realize our potential. These are identical engines, and Christians are identical in every way. There is no difference in Christians. There is no difference in Christians. There is no difference. God isn't showing partiality. He says in the Bible that only a wicked man shows partiality. So how in the world could He be showing partiality and someone over here has a special dispensation from God? That isn't possible. You have Christ in you, and of course that's what we're doing in our teaching, is we're not bringing something that we have that you don't have. We want to witness to what everybody already has in them, this revelation of Christ in them. But the problem is we live out of our humanity and out of our own strength, and we stay in first gear, never realizing what He can do for me. And then in the West, we're terrible about trying to maintain our comfort so we can't find out what He'll provide for me. See, I want to be spiritual, but I don't want any things that make me spiritual. So I'm going to love my enemies, but don't give me any enemies. I want to pray for those who persecute me, but don't give me anyone that persecutes me. I want to live like a sparrow. I want to find out that He can provide everything, that I could be free, that I could live as a millionaire. But please don't take away my money, so I find that out. And we're driven by those things. There's 3 reasons for money in the Bible, and one of them isn't security. My security's in Him. But when my need is this big, my God is only this big. When my need is this big, my God becomes that big. So He's putting me in a place of need where I just can't handle it and run in this gear any longer. I've got to start realizing the potential that's in me. So when someone is learning how to shift a car, and some of you had the misfortune of getting to teach people how to drive, and especially how to shift, one of the most annoying things is a person who won't shift. So I was sharing that I was teaching my daughter how to drive, and I said, okay, love, now we're going to have to merge onto the interstate here, and you got to merge with the traffic. That's what this means, yield, and this is a merge lane, and you've got to get your speed up to what that is, and let's go. And all she does is this. Whee! I said, get your speed up, get your speed. Whee! Would you please shift? Whee! When they finally shift, how good does that feel? When a Christian is complaining about everything that's going on and about their situation and how miserable it is and how terrible the kids are and how bad the marriage is, they're just standing in front of you, whee, whining. Well, stop whining and shift and realize the potential that's in you and see God in the situation instead of seeing yourself. So you can look at it another way. He wants to show me what all He can do, and this is all the bigger my belief system is. This is all I believe God can do in this circle. And so he brings a situation or a crisis that's bigger than I believe God can handle. You find drugs in your kid's room. What do? You're going to discuss with them, debate with them, fight over it. I'm not saying that you don't confront those things. But what we do is we immediately close the door to Christ's life, and we've got to resolve this whole thing ourselves in our own strength. And we're in a crisis because the situation's bigger than my belief system, and in the power of my own strength, I'm trying to shrink the thing. I want to fill the gap with me and bring it down. And you can tell people that are trying to shrink the situation because they're full of worry, they manipulate, they're working, they're controlling, they're in the flesh over the thing. And finally, they can't change it. And the only thing they can do is turn to Him. And there's an explosion in the belief system. And the system, my new belief system, now meets the situation, and I'm at a place of peace. I was so impressed by this woman called, her name's Marge, who's, she's pushing 100 now, still prays for us. Missionary in Peru, husband died there, went back to Kansas City with 5 kids, 4 kids in ministry, and then 1 kid who's an absolute mess. And she sent me the tape of his funeral that she spoke at. And she said, at this funeral, she said, you know my son. All of you here, the family's here. He died at age 67. He was an alcoholic his whole life. He was in and out of drug rehab. He was married 4 times. You know that you couldn't have him in your house because he would steal anything he could get his hands on. You just left for a minute and he stole it. She said that many times he got a hold of my bank account, my checking account, everything. But I want to tell everyone here today at the funeral that he was the biggest blessing in my life, more than any of my other children. That I'm who I am today because of that boy, and I thank God for that boy. Because he's the one that made my belief system explode. She said, I'm the woman of prayer I am, all because of him. Just when I thought things were going right, he'd do one more stupid thing that I couldn't handle. And I'd try to shrink it, and then I'd finally have to go to God and have an explosion in my faith. And my old system just went into a new system, and then a new situation came, and I grew from faith to faith to faith because of that boy. She said, I thank God for him. And then she ended and said, oh, by the way, God's faithful. Just a few days before he died from liver failure, he called me into the hospital room and he said, Mom, I know Jesus is real because of you. Is it too late for me? And she said, I prayed with him and he gave his life to Jesus in that room. She'd gone from faith to faith to faith, and she could look back at it now and say, God was in all of that, working in all of that. And it all has to do with what your system is and what your goal is. And our goal is the revelation of Christ and the release of Christ in our lives. I was sharing at lunch that sometimes I'll be on the road and I'll start complaining, and the Lord will just stop me and go, well, Mike, what do you want? Do you want me to give you more money? Do you want to have better health? What do you want? I'll give you what you want. What do you want? And I stop and I go, no, I don't want any of that. I want the revelation of Christ in me. I want to see what that is. I want to exit this place knowing what it means that he lives and he dwells in me. You know, I deserve the Nobel Prize. I mentioned this before, and nobody will give it to me. But 2 discoveries make me worthy of getting it. One is the discovery of what cures selfishness. And what will cure selfishness is to be selfless. It's the only thing that'll feed it, the only thing that'll make it happy. But I also know the cure for all race relations. And it's a very, very simple cure. All you have to do is admit that you hate the people. You know, I was talking to the Latvians, and I said, what would you say if I came in here today and I said, I hate Russians. I can't stand the Russians. We don't want any Russians in church. I hope no Russian goes to heaven. I hope all the Russians go to hell. What would you think of me as a pastor if I said that? Well, it really surprised me because I looked at the Latvians who'd been oppressed by them for 50 years, and they were all in the audience doing this. Now, they were all right with me. But if I came into a church in America and I said, I hate black people, I can't stand the black people, I don't want any black people in here, I don't want any black people even going to heaven, By the way, I don't like the Indians either. I don't want any Indians there, and I don't like the Asians. I hate them. I'd just like to have an all-white church and not have any of those people around. In fact, I'm not even so sure I like the white people. What would you say to me? See, we'd immediately say that person ought to be outed. And so it keeps us from saying it. But I can't leave where I am until I admit where I am. And if that's really where I am, if I can admit it, I could actually begin to leave it. And so you can't dispossess until you possess. And there's no way for me to take this pen and give it to you by looking at it like this and doing that. I have to possess it to dispossess it. And the only way I'll get rid of these things is if I own them, and then I can disown it. And if you really feel that way about black people, and black people feel that way about white people, why don't you admit it to God and say, I don't have any love, I hate the people, and now what are we going to do? And you'll hear him whisper to you, I am. I am to you everything you're not. Invite me. And then when you go to another race, it won't be the adjusted person, the socially responsible person going. It won't be an echo of the world going. It won't be the compassionate person going. It won't be a moral person going. It'll be the very life of Christ flowing through you to that person. Tell me, what do people really need? They need Christ. And they need him flowing through me. I actually believe, and I've seen it work out, that a lot of marriages have improved when the people would admit that they hate each other. Boy, it's hard to get them to do it. But you know what? Just finally admit it to God. I'm done with the man. I don't like the way he chooses food. I don't like the way he walks. I don't like the way he lays his clothes around. I don't like the way he drives. I don't like a thing about the guy. I'm done with him. I'm out of love. I don't have any. I'm out of love. And you'll hear him whisper, but I am. And then the love that comes is an incredible love. But it's so difficult because we don't want to be that honest and we don't want to have those kind of weaknesses. But as I say that, I find that he is my love and he'll flow through me.